Thank you, Sarah, for a great synopsis of the reasons to caption your media. Access first, and foremost, but there are so many practical benefits for all kinds of users. It's a really broad topic, lots of ground to cover, so I thought I would start with my first exposure to captioning work. This was back in 2000 when I first founded Frameweld. We created some demos of our rich media technology. We shot a 13-minute video. Online video, online accessibility were nascent at that time, so I did everything by hand. Transcribed it, timed everything, coded it by hand, and considering this was 13 years ago, I think it ended up looking great. But it was a very time-consuming and painful process. It was so painful that in our first year, we started creating some tools that aided us in that process, and we haven't really stopped ever since. Captioning became an important element in the work that we did, and as we focused on it, I became more aware of the challenges and opportunities and also what constitutes quality captioning. So I'm going to focus first on offline captioning, which, as Sarah mentioned, refers to captions that you create for pre-recorded media. And I'll get back to live a little bit later on. So let's get into the how. Not just how to create captions, but how to create quality captions. There's three basic elements. You need an accurate transcript, accurate timing, and effective segmentation. So let's start with the transcript, because that's really where captions begin. Lorem ipsum text is not gonna cut it. It has a really big impact on caption quality because you can't convey the correct information in your captions if it's not correct in the transcript. So that brings us to timing. So with a great transcript in hand, you now have to sync that text to the related speech in your media. You want timings that are as accurate as possible, and you want to keep them up long enough to allow users to read them. And that takes us into segmentation, which often gets overlooked because people associate the transcript and timing work with captioning. But it's really a key aspect of quality captioning. In other words, creating captions that are friendly to users and usable. So the goal in effective segmentation is to create caption segments that are easily digestible, readable without requiring lots of effort on the part of the user. So it's a matter of chunking our text, similar to how the celery here is being chunked. So you want to keep several things in mind when it comes to segmentation. One of them is timing, right? An effective segment doesn't, for instance, span text that's spoken over a minute or several minutes or something like that. Number two is length. We're talking about digestible chunks, so you want to limit the amount of text you show at one time, typically 32 to 40 characters per line. Third is syntax, so I hope you can remember back to some of your high school English. You want to create segments with the greatest semantic load. And if you look at the two examples up here, for most people, the caption segment on top gets processed much more easily than the one below, even though we've just moved a single word, fox, from the first line down to the next line. And that's because the quick brown fox is a more complete thought than the quick brown. So when we talk about creating segments with a high semantic load, we want to create segments that represent more complete thoughts. And if we have to break things across segments or across lines, we want to try to break them at the highest syntactic point. So you can think of it as creating chunks of text that are brain-friendly. And number 4, related to segmentation, is proportionality. Lopsided caption segments, as we see here, are quite hard to read, even if they are broken at the highest syntactic note. So what you have in segmentation is a process of chunking text by balancing a number of factors: timing, syntax, length, and proportionality. But when you do it right, it ends up creating captions that lend themselves to easier cognitive processing, which ultimately means more usable captions for your users. Okay, so how does this all come together? Well, most captioning is handled manually. Going back to my earlier example, it's not that far off from what I was doing 13 years ago. And if you look at quality captioning, almost all of it is done manually. And there's many tools that aid that process. We've created a lot of those kinds of tools, but ultimately the quality depends heavily on the amount of time you invest in creating them, especially if you're looking for high-quality segmentation, near-perfect transcripts, frame-accurate timings. And of course that adds up in terms of dollars too. There's captioners who will charge $500 or $800 per media hour, others that charge $100 or $200 per media hour. And what you find is that captioning is time intensive, and in order to offer those cheap rates, you have to cut the effort somehow, and the quality then suffers. Which brings us to automation. So if you're like me, you're wondering, can't we introduce some technology to speed this process up, improve quality, and reduce cost? And the answer is yes, and that's really what we've been working on for the last 2 years. A platform called Syncwords, which is a labor of love to really help first and foremost create quality captioning, and also try to make that more cost-effective, more efficient, so that more organizations can provide captioning and expand access. But you have to be selective, because there's examples of fully automated captioning out there. And I'm sure many of you have seen the results on YouTube. You can see captions that are laughably bad, perhaps for hearing audiences, not so funny for deaf and hard of hearing audiences. So in case you didn't catch what was the captions there, the top line here, I would never lie to you about a fake Jamaican vacation. When it goes through a fully automated process, you end up with like a Jack Kerouac kind of beat poetry, weird thing going on, not really something that expands access to the media. So we looked at those 3 elements to see where we could develop technology to automate or partially automate that process while committing to quality. Because creating usable captions was key to what we want to achieve. As we've seen, there's already many ways to generate really bad captions automatically. So where we ended up was Syncwords kind of adopted a manual approach to transcription and automation of timing and segmentation. I guess, I often get the question, this will transcribe what's spoken, right? And the answer is no. We decided really early on we were not even going to try to automate that step. ASR is wonderful technology, but it's just not generating usable transcripts for captioning purposes. We were quite confident on timing, and we have some great results. When we got started, we surveyed the landscape, and we saw a lot of potential pitfalls. Automated timing, tools, but they, might require pristine audio and a verbatim transcript for usable results. You could often get like an error amplification effect where, poor audio or transcript could result in some things misaligning, which then gets compounded as your clip goes on. And we were really aiming for a solution that would be usable across a broader range of use cases, because the reality is that most video and audio that gets recorded doesn't have perfect production values. And it's much more common to find video that has music and noise than not. So at this point, I'm going to actually attempt to do something more challenging than captioning. I'm going to try to type audio from my computer into this meeting so you can see some of the results. And while I'm playing this, I won't be able to speak to you. So I will just keep it short, maybe 30 or 40 seconds to give you an indication of what Syncwords can produce in terms of quality captioning. So let me switch to this audio over, and I'll be back in a minute.
When John Boehner first became Speaker after the 2010 elections, the Republicans stormed up to Capitol Hill and announced, remember this, a whole new set of rules for the House. Congress was not just changing the party in charge. They weren't just changing leadership. They said they were going to change Congress entirely as an institution. They were just not going to do things the same way anymore. Their most substantive new rule was that no longer would it be possible to pass legislation that cost money without also passing something to pay for the cost of that other thing. That was
You're gold. You're solid gold. Let's see what else we got. I like what's happening so far. Sir, come on up here. Let's get the fellas involved. How are you?
Great. I'm very nervous.
Well, I don't want you to be, because that's what we have to get out of the way, right? We're a team. We're a team on this thing. Now, what is your name?
Eric.
Eric. That's a fantastic name. So off the bat, you're doing terrific. Now, Eric, here's a question. Have you been drinking?
No.
Okay. You plan to? Like fun night out, or I just got the ankle bracelet off? What kind of drink?
The ankle bracelet off.
Get the ankle bracelet off. Let's keep it together until then. Now, Eric, in knowing that, I have to ask.
Okay, everyone, I'm back with you, and I hope you're still with me, and you were able to see some of those clips. There's, some inherent challenges in trying to share captioning over a live meeting like this because the audio gets piped into a call, and what you're seeing in terms of video on your screen might have a different lag, so it may not, depending on the user, it may not seem that everything is perfectly in sync, but the synchronization is very highly accurate. In terms of so I showed two examples. One was of like a Rachel Maddow clip, and then we saw something in Saturday Night Live. When we're working with audio that's clear, Syncwords will generate start and end time for every word at close to 100% accuracy. But then we talked about, this broader set of use cases. So we can throw, more challenging material at it. We've taken webinars recorded under truly horrid conditions, and it does great. We throw also a lot of broadcast material, as you see with that SNL clip we looked at, with noise, music, other kinds of auditory curveballs, and it also turns out highly accurate timings, somewhere in the range of between 92 and 99% of segments. In terms of the segmentation, when we started, it was, we were very unsure. We weren't really sure how we were going to approach this and, how it would pan out. We've developed several tools that basically chop transcripts up into segments and tee them up for a user to time them, but didn't come near close to what an experienced person could do with segmentation. And a lot of that sort of like sophisticated natural language processing, we dropped it, and we implemented instead a supervised machine learning approach. And I'm happy to say that it worked out great. And our segmentation results are on par with our timing results. So under ideal conditions, we can generate highly usable caption segments for 99% of them. And when we throw more challenging broadcast material with rapid speaker changes, people talking over each other, we get a success rate of 91% or greater. And I know you're probably thinking, well, this is much more subjective. It's not a question of precision, as timing is, and that's absolutely true. So we worked with people who have a tremendous amount of experience in the captioning field, and we essentially asked them to evaluate if those segments measured up to their standards of what a person would create in terms of segmenting that content. And I'll just point out that we don't expect to stop working on this technology. A lot of work is going on to improve those scores even further when we're dealing with adverse condition. But this ends up being our model of how we approach captioning with a high degree of quality and automation. So it's the manual transcript, automation of timing, automation of segmentation. And I'm actually going to switch over to the tool because I want to show you a few things. So let's see, there we go. Automation is a great thing, but we want to give users an easy way to review the work that Syncwords perform and make edits if they're needed. So if you're working with broadcast material and you have a 95% success rate, it's still not as good as it could be. So, captioning is often like a mysterious process to organizations, and if they get feedback on the quality of captioning, often there's no result because there could be additional cost incurred. They're unsure what the process is. So we wanted to provide a way where users could review the work that Syncwords did. So this is basically a transcript. This is audio here. And I'm not going to pipe this. I'm not going to pipe this into the call, but this is basically a countdown, and then our audio begins here. And you can basically see on a word level how Syncwords is synchronizing the material. Syncwords also recognizes speaker labels and what we call cues, which might be like parentheticals, sort of non-speech audio that might be timed along with the rest of the media. There's also tools that allow you to make edits to all of this. So you could edit this text if there was a typo or a sentence was dropped out, you could type it in. And one of the great things about Syncwords is that it will retime a portion of your transcript on the fly so that as soon as you're done with your edit, you have a new caption file that you can upload in order to correct whatever problems you had. So, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the flexibility of this approach. Because when your project is ready, in Syncwords you can basically pick some options and get your captions. But since Syncwords is timing every single word, you can choose one output or you could choose 5. You could choose one, say, at like a traditional captioning length of 32 characters, one that preserves speaker labels, one that removes them. And there's a lot of sophisticated options here as well in terms of, how you exactly want your users to experience captions, that kind of thing. But if we were to approach this the old-fashioned, the manual way, like many outputs, if they had different segmentation characteristics, you're looking at essentially redoing that work for each separate output that you need. In Syncwords, you only do that once when you run the project. Then you have the ability to pull all kinds of outputs. We're also exploring that flexibility right now and ways to leverage that. We're using the word level timings to create some karaoke style captions to basically flash some words in the segments as they're spoken. And we're also exploring word level and segmented sync of ebooks with audiobooks. And, as Sarah mentioned earlier, there's some great potential benefits for multisensory learners as well as dyslexic users and others when you stress that association between the written word and what's spoken. But it also has a universal design appeal because publishers can use that information to create some innovative features. Say, a reader sort of, dropping off from reading the book and having it sort of pick up and read to them, at that point, or vice versa. So I promised to get to live captions. So let me do that because we're making headway into our time. We're using them for the webinar, for this webinar right now, and as you can see, I just pulled up, we have our live caption window, real-time captions coming in. to provide access for any users who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also for all users because, again, captioning can benefit everyone. And for this event, we're using our own live captioning platform called Recapped to get those captions to you. There's other solutions out there too, but there's a few things that are really great about Recap. You can create a shareable URL like we have here to email or tweet out a way for people to access captions. You can access this on a mobile device. You can embed this on your own website to deliver captions there. It also speaks the language of live captioning for television. So it has lots of applications for, for media and broadcast. It can take in live captions, archive them, make them searchable. You can export transcripts as well as caption files. Lots of other features too. Too many to go into right now, but the aim is similar to Syncwords. The goal is to help organizations speed and automate as much of the process as possible while emphasizing quality. And in case you're wondering, there's no speech recognition involved. There's a very nice person on the other end, Vanna, listening and creating the real-time captions. I'll just share one more thing about Recapped, our most recent work on it, because it represents the future direction of our work, and I think it furthers the goal of greater automation and efficiency, and therefore greater access. We recently added a server API and a client API, so organizations can begin to integrate the live captioning capabilities of Recap into their own systems and their own offerings. And this is especially compelling for organizations that do a lot of captioning work. When you need an archive transcript or caption file, you don't need a user to come into Recap and click around to get it. Your system, speaks the RESTful API language and tells Recap, get me this file, post this new information, delete this event, put, an updated title on this event, things like that. And that's just for starters. It opens up a lot of exciting possibilities where we're only limited by our imagination and the modest effort that's needed to integrate. We've discussed with different organizations advertising applications, of course, transforming live captions as they come in to make them interactive, to introduce graphics and symbols that otherwise couldn't be used. To index captions as they come in to provide real-time search capabilities, and on and on. I mean, it's really just a question of what we can dream up. And it's not just relevant to Recap. Syncwords also has an API. It's really entirely API-driven. The way Syncwords is set up is that there's an engine in Amazon's cloud, highly scalable environment, and it does all of its communication via an API, even our own web application that we were looking at just a minute ago. So our hope going...
What languages are supported? What languages are supported in Recap?
Oh, okay. We got a question on languages supported in Recap. That is a good question. So Recap supports English and Western European languages because it supports certain types of character sets. So it supports accented characters. It's used regularly for captioning in Spanish. A lot of Spanish events get captioned live in Recap. It doesn't at this point support other character sets like Greek, Cyrillic, or others. So just to conclude on the API, you know, it's our hope going forward that more organizations will integrate the capabilities of Recap and Syncwords into their own systems and offerings. And you know, I'm optimistic that these tools and the possibilities they offer to make captioning easier and more cost-effective will end up making it more relevant to organizations. And ultimately, you know, that expands the amount of captioning done, which in turn expands access for all, not to mention all of the other great benefits that Sarah addressed earlier. So I just want to thank you for your time today and for allowing me and Sarah to share our passion, our rationale and approach to captioning, as well as our tools. So you can find more information about our work at Frameweld.com, Syncwords.com, Recap.com, and of course, you know, we would love it if you get in touch with us. We'd love to talk to you. You can find us via email, Skype, Twitter. Okay, I see we have quite a few questions, so I am gonna just end it there. So I'd love to answer as many as I can before we conclude. Thank you very much.